All right, we are going to talk today about succession planning. If you haven't watched the last episode that I did with Peter Paddon, which is all about the story of First Focus, his founding story, please go watch that first because it's going to give you a lot of context as to what we're talking about today, which is great. You've built this amazing vehicle, you've got a lot of success, you've got a truckload of what's the word I'm looking for here, Peter?
Runway,
you're going up. Yeah, you're doing well.
Yep.
Then at what point do you decide to leave? How do you make a successful exit? How do you park the ego? How do you find the right people? How do you do all of that? That is what today is about. So, we're just saying this before off camera. When did it actually happen? 2018?
Yes.
Okay. And
yes.
So, why then?
It actually started before then.
Okay.
Like most things do.
Yep.
The genesis was an unsolicited approach from a larger competitor who essentially said, we want to buy you out.
Right.
And
But I imagine that wasn't the first time you'd had an offer of some sort.
it was the first genuine offer, tangible, money on the table,
Okay.
quantifiable. It was a real offer.
At a reasonable valuation.
Reasonable valuation.
Okay.
Really got me thinking. It was, someone dangling a life-changing check in front of me going, you could have this tomorrow.
Right.
It was from a buyer who is still in the market, still quite well-respected, large organisation.
They haven't exited themselves? Well, actually, I assume they're not, like yourself, a single owner, like most other large owners. Really?
Similar.
Ooh, I'm starting to get interested in who this might be. I'll listen.
No. I was thinking, wow, okay, I could do this. And I hadn't really seriously thought about selling the business, in the short term. But when someone dangles a life-changing check in front of you, it gets you thinking. And so I thought, okay, I'll take that, under consideration. I'll go away and have a think about it. And the conclusion that I came to was, well, if I got a big check, it's not like it's a lot, but it's not like, completely going to change the rest of my life. What would I do with this cash? Buy a house, and I'd probably go buy an IT business.
And here we go again.
And here we go again.
Okay.
And that was kind of the conclusion that I came to is, well, why?
Yeah.
Why? And I wasn't clear on a reason for the exit. And so I think that's the most important thing, right? If you want to exit a business, why? What's the reason? And if the reason is, like most people, I would imagine would be financial. You want to take chips off the table. You want to de-risk. You want to basically set yourself up so you don't have to do this anymore. That's cool, and that's a really good reason. So what's the number? I think it's very clear. It's very important to have that number being very clear, right? Because if you've got a number that is going to make you happy, and then you bet the farm on doubling that number, that's a terrible bet to make. Because if you've got a number that's going to make you happy, why risk anything to exceed that number? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
But we discussed that a little bit in our last conversation, which is how does that definition of success or that measure of success change over time? And I don't know anyone who doesn't live to their income, really. So
that's also true, right? But I think everyone's circumstances are different as well. The most important question is why, and Simon Sinek's 5 whys. Why? Why do you want to exit? What's the purpose? What's the objective? What's the mission? Because that's going to inform everything from that point on. In answering that why, I think lots of business owners don't know the full spectrum of possibilities, right? Most business owners that I've talked to, particularly small business owners that I've talked to, believe that an exit is selling the business and walking away. And there are more options than that. You can sell half your business. You can sell a minority share in your business to a management team. You can debt fund lifestyle. You can, there are a lot of different financial instruments, and there's a lot of different people who take your money quite happily to tell you what those different options are. But there are far more options and far more complicated options than simply selling a business and walking away completely, right? So that's probably the first thing that I would want to get out there is why do you want to sell, or why do you want to exit? And based on that why, what are the options that will support that why? Okay, and so what are the financial options? And then there's different structures, there's different ways and means of doing it. So for me, the process of exiting started off with, okay, someone's just dangled a life-changing check in front of me and I didn't want to exit.
Why?
So why didn't I want to exit? And undeniably, I think in my circumstance, in my case, I love this business. There's a very strong link between who I am and who this business is and what this business is, right? So I think, I read somewhere that in a small privately held business, the culture and values of the business are a direct reflection on the culture and values of the owner, right? Makes
sense.
Like the two things are intrinsically tied together. So the why I didn't sell was important.
What'd you land on?
Why didn't
you sell? What did you land on as the reason?
I didn't sell because first of all, I didn't need to financially, which is important. Second of all, I didn't want to from a ego perspective, maybe, or from a life purpose perspective. I felt that the business still had a huge amount of runway in front of it, not just from a financial perspective, but also what we wanted to achieve. Mm-hmm. I believed then, and I know to be true now, that First Focus should be the number one MSP in the country. I think that's achievable.
Club Tango says we have been for 7 years, but
well, yeah, exactly right. Competitors might argue against that, and I'm sure that we are not the best in a number of categories, but I'm sure that we are the best in a number. I think I love the culture of the business. I love what's been built here, and I love seeing it continue to grow. The thesis around exiting for me at the time just didn't stack up. I was certainly selling the business at the time, didn't stack up. All that said, wind the clock forward to, was it 2018? At that stage, we've been running pretty hard for, close to 20 years.
Yeah.
I had a young family, wanted to spend more time outside the business on other pursuits. I love my racing.
Love your racing.
Yeah. Golf, poker, various other things, property. And I thought, you know what, I want to take a sabbatical. I just need to take a break. I'd been talking to a lot of people who are also running large businesses and successful businesses, and they were saying how great it was to take a break, particularly when, a CEO jumps from one job to another and takes 6 months of gardening leave and uses that time to do something amazing and creative and recharge and whatnot. And I thought that sounds really, really cool. So what I actually want is to be able to take 6 months away from the business and know that everything is going to be fine in my absence. Mm-hmm. Because leading up to that, the longest holiday I had taken was 2 weeks.
What?
Yeah, in 20 years.
Oof.
2 weeks was the longest holiday I'd taken in 20 years.
Okay. What's your blood pressure like around this time?
Yeah, look, I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing things.
Okay.
So, you don't get yelled at by clients for 20 years without building up pretty thick skin.
Yeah, resilient. Yeah.
And it's not just yelled at by clients, it's that sense of accountability and ownership over everything, right?
I think that's it. The clients probably aren't yelling at you, but you feel a deep sense of obligation to make sure that their businesses are running as well as they can off the back of your services. If you actually give a shit, if you deeply care, then that weighs on you, I think.
Yeah. I mean, in the early days, it was a deep sense of obligation around making payroll.
Right.
And, one of the things that I'm proudest of is, hand over heart, I can say that in the 22-year history of the company, we've never been late with payroll.
Awesome.
We've paid superannuation entitlements in full. Staff entitlements always 100% covered. Previous places I worked that blew up, that was not the case.
Okay.
So I've seen what bad looks like. One of my best mates worked in an industry that was known for not paying staff on time, not paying entitlements and all that. And he went from job to job and just disaster. And I just thought, there's no way. There's no way I'm going to do that. This company is going to run properly and well and tick all those boxes, and I don't care what it costs from a profitability perspective. We're going to make sure that is all 100%. And so that's been great. But the sense of accountability and the sense of responsibility, 2 weeks was the longest holiday. That kind of wears at you after 20 years. So I was like, I'm ready for a break. Like we should theoretically be in a strong enough position that I could take 6 months off and not have to worry about the business. And I don't care about growth, and I don't care about, continuing this exponential curve. I just want to be able to take some time off, because if I can do that, then I can keep going.
And did you feel like, had you actually put any thought into, how far out from that 6 month start date had you been thinking about that, and how much?
Yeah, probably 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've really been building the structure and the capability and the people.
So I mentioned before about maximizing our return on luck, being in a position to kind of do what you want to do if you get the circumstances to be able to do it. To successfully transition out of a business, having been completely accountable for it. So if you're a small business owner and you don't have a business partner that you can kind of rely on when you're out of the business, you have to rely on someone else, right? So how do you do that? And how do you get to that point? Well, the first, I think there's a couple of ingredients that it's imperative to get the foundation and the platform in place. The first thing that you absolutely need to get in place is you need to have a very reliable financial forecast. Because if you don't have a reliable financial forecast, you will constantly be worrying about money, unless you've got a highly profitable business, in which case, okay, fine, you don't need that. But I'm assuming that you've got a business where you're going to be checking your receipts, you're going to be checking your overdues, you're going to be checking, all the things that you need to check. So you need a good financial forecast. And the thing that a good financial forecast then allows you to do is set a threshold number that says, if we don't have X dollars coming in, whether it's a profit number or a cash at bank number or whatever it is, if we don't have this projected in 12 months, ring an alarm bell. And you can be very clear. Once you've got a good forecast, you can have a very clear metric, and then once you've got a very clear metric, you can have very clear accountability. That's right. So it starts with the forecast. That then turns into a very clear metric, and then that then turns into having the knowledge that someone in the finance function is going to ring an alarm bell if it looks like that's not going to happen, rather than waiting for the money to run out and then ringing up and going, hey, we've got a problem, that's not cool. The second thing, and it's kind of the same thing, but it's having those metrics all across the business, right? So, we talk a lot about leading indicators and lagging indicators. So lagging indicators are things that look into the past. So how much money have we got in the bank today is a lagging indicator of what we did last month in order to generate it. Leading indicators are things like employee satisfaction, things like customer satisfaction on tickets. What's the amount of work in progress?
Yeah, sales pipeline.
Pipeline. All that sort of thing, right? So the better your indicators are, the better your metrics are, the less you need to worry about what's going to happen, and the more you know what's going to happen, and you can course correct. So I think metrics, as boring and dry a topic as it is, metrics are the key to exiting.
Right.
Yeah.
So you basically had this at least 12-month map. You're only looking at taking 6. From your point of view, you already kind of knew what that period looked like.
Yeah.
Really, there were no surprises during that period.
Yeah.
So pretty safe.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay.
And we're lucky. We're an MSP. We're in an industry where we get contracted recurring revenue and
largely.
Yeah. So that definitely helps. But my role in the business leading up to that point, one of my key roles was as CFO. So I built the financial forecast, which I had lots of arguments with financial people over, and I said, no, I want it done this way.
So for anyone who doesn't know, there's a forecast document within First Focus that is an absolute beast. So that was your baby. You created that, you built that. That's the guts of what we got today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that was built on the basis of me coming into the office one Friday and being told that we had actually made a 200K loss instead of a 200K profit in a year.
That's a big variance.
A massive variance. I'm like, how does this happen?
Yeah, that's horrible.
Like, this is...
Yeah.
And so...
Can't work with those kind of shocks.
Yeah. So I had this massive shock, and I basically spent that entire weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Just spreadsheeting.
I think I slept 6 hours that whole weekend, trying to work out where the money had gone.
Right. Yeah. I can't function on 3 hours sleep a night, by the way. But
well, yeah,
you can,
caffeine, lots, yeah, I'm like, guys, this is just intolerable. Like, you know, we need to know. And so, yeah, I kind of pulled everything apart and built a spreadsheet. I said, right, this is now being maintained, like, no question. This spreadsheet must be updated.
This is life. This is the
This
Bible.
is life. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
Because literally, you know, people depend on it to pay their rent. Yeah. So that was built very early on and gave a lot of confidence. But then we massively scaled out our internal metrics and dashboards. Being a software guy, I made the horrible mistake of deciding that I was going to write our internal ticketing system.
Right.
So I built.
It's easy for me to laugh in retrospect, but yeah.
It was the stupidest thing I've ever done. I wrote this thing called First Base, which was First Focus's first ticketing system,
right,
where all the jobs got logged. And prior to that was all in Excel spreadsheets, right? Which is
still a step in the right direction then.
Yeah. So it was better than that. So I wrote this thing, and you know, it was kind of okay for a 5-person MSP, and it kind of did
the job,
and it was good, and it had some great forecasting tools in it, and that sort of stuff. But it just was not scalable, and it just didn't. It was bad. So the mistake that I made was writing that and spending probably 1,000 hours of my life, probably more actually. Realistically, 2,000 hours maybe was invested in.
Was there any slight hope that maybe they'd turn into some sort of SaaS spin-off or something?
Yeah, but by the end of by hour, like if I spent 2,000 hours on it, by about hour 1,000, I thought, I'm just so over this. I do not want to see it ever again. But I was committed too deeply at that point to back out of it. What I should have done is spent 500 hours researching the best ticketing software. And I spent 100 hours, I think, researching the best ticketing software. I probably spent 3 solid weeks trying to find the right ticketing software. Couldn't find anything, decided to write one. Bad decision. Should have spent 500 hours trying to find the right tool. Anyway, so long story short, we ditched that, got ConnectWise. And there's a few right now, there's some excellent mature ticketing platforms available that weren't available 20 years ago. ConnectWise was relatively new then, and it's been a great product for us. I think we're now the #1 user of ConnectWise in Australia. I think. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Again, claim it, hashtag.
Why not?
Yeah.
I'm sure someone will write in and correct us. So, and the cool thing about products like ConnectWise is if you use them to their maximum potential, the data that you get from them is invaluable. If you don't use them to their maximum potential, the data that you get from them is invariably garbage. So it's kind of a binary choice to me. Either you're going to go all in and use it to the degree that is expensive, or you're going to use just the bits of it that are convenient. And this is a key choice for any business, right? For any software product. To me, a strategic decision is a decision that incurs a cost. If there's no cost attached to a decision, it's not really a strategic decision. It's just common sense. A strategic decision is something that incurs a cost. The strategic decision that we made is we are going to go all in on ConnectWise. We are going to use every feature of it exactly as intended. We are going to bend the processes of this business to comply with the software, rather than bending the software to comply with our business processes. Okay. Right. There's a cost attached to that.
Yeah.
There's overhead. There's
Staff you'll piss off that'll leave.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There are things that people hate doing, like timesheets.
Oh yeah.
There is, all of those overheads. That is a significant cost. So why do it, right? The benefit is you get awesome data, right? You get the best data. You get a software product that is going to support the processes of your business that you don't have to customize and tailor, and ideally is never going to break because you're using it the way that it's intended. You get a roadmap on that software. You get a lot of benefits, but the biggest benefit you get out of it is the data, because the data leads to metrics, and the metrics lead to dashboards, and the dashboards, what you measure means what you measure you can manage.
Yeah.
And so if you get really good timesheet data, you get really good profitability data. You can analyze and get detailed reports on the profitability of clients, on the performance of people, you can put numbers as targets for people, and you know that those numbers are real targets and real numbers because it all marries up. All that ultimately comes back to, here's my phone.
Down here
somewhere. Yeah. All that ultimately comes back to a dashboard that I carry around on my phone that tells me exactly what's going on in every area of the business.
Well, even now, I know that Ross says if Pete can't look at the exec dashboard and make sense of it, then you're not doing a good enough job with the data. Like the data doesn't. If the data needs a conversation, it's not the right data.
Yep.
And even with our SQLs, there was variability between sort of one year to the next because of the categorization of SQL that changed. It's like, well, then that needs a conversation, so the data's wrong. Like, fix it, basically.
Yeah. One of my favorite movies is a movie called Office Space.
Office Space,
and it's just the one where they stand around a printer and beat it up with a baseball bat.
Come in on Saturday.
Exactly, right. And there's this TPS report in Office Space where the staff are basically railing about the stupidity of filling out these TPS reports. And I remember thinking to myself when I was watching that, don't be the guy that requires people to fill out a
look at you now
TPS report. Like this is not what we do. So if there is data entry required anywhere in the business, it needs to have a purpose. And it needs to have a very clearly defined purpose. Don't do dumb stuff. Don't waste time. Don't come to work hating your job because you're doing meaningless rubbish. If you're filling out a timesheet and it's going in ConnectWise, it's got a very, very clear purpose. And the purpose is that needs to flow up to a visible dashboard so that everyone in the business can take ownership over what that data means, right? So it's like the Smileback statistics, the customer sat statistics, the RAG status of clients, like all of those things that we've got on our dashboard, they're very publicly displayed throughout the business, so everyone can see when you enter that data, that's the number that it can affect. And
look, increasingly so. And look, this is almost turning into in a very good way, a separate podcast around data and the value of it and the why. But to take it even a step further is we're really taking almost a software, like a SaaS approach to sales with a demo. Like you should be able to show people the data or the product, and so the Bright Gauge reporting, you can go in and actually show, like, if we care about tickets, same day SLA, well, here's how it's tracked. Like, here's the things, right? And
all of this comes back to transitioning, because walking away from a business and handing control of it over to someone else is in a large part an exercise in trust, but it's also an exercise in aligning goals and aligning vision and decision making and that kind of thing. So all of this kind of all sort of gels together. It's all intrinsically related. If you've got good data, you can do a lot. You can forecast things. You can put targets on things, and there's nothing quite like a numerical target to be clear and actionable so. I can say to Ross, I want that number to be an 8, and I want that number to be a 4, and I never want to see that number below a 95. And Ross is like, cool, okay, that. And then I don't care how he does it. Right?
Clearly defined measures of success. Go get it done.
Yeah, exactly right. And you can cascade that down the organization as well. This comes back to this Liz Wiseman book that I was saying before about multipliers. If you're heavily prescriptive about how you want something to be done, I find that incredibly demotivating. I've often believed you can tell someone what to do, or you can tell someone why you want something done, but you can't you can't dictate an outcome to someone if you're also going to tell them exactly how you want them to do it, because you're basically taking away all their autonomy. If you can say to someone, here's the result that I want, you figure it out, go and do it.
Yeah.
If you do that in the right way and you provide the right structure around that, it can be incredibly motivating. People can be creative.
Yep.
They can come up with a more efficient way to do it. You try and tap into people's latent genius and tap into their own ability to think things through. I mean, that's how you maximize the results from people, not by being heavily prescriptive. So I'm a big fan of a target. Say, here's the objective, you figure it out. But you can only do that if you've got good ways of measuring those targets. So ConnectWise was the first of many, many, many bits of internal software that strategically we decided we were going to invest a lot in internal software, probably more than most, a lot more than most, and heavily customize it and tailor it, and sorry, not customize it, but heavily invest in customizing ourselves around the software to make sure that we were using it properly. And so when we did that, we were fortunate enough to have this guy over in our Perth office who was a ConnectWise genius. And I was like, okay, cool, you can be in charge of this. We're going to put it in, and the mandate is put it in properly, right? You tell us what best practice looks like, right? You're now the owner of this software product. You roll it out across the business, and if you fight with a department head over how to best configure this software, then you can have a constructive argument, but then escalate, and I'll make a call on it.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, it was like, well, how does the software reckon we should do it? Okay, this is how you should run an engineering division according to the software. I was like, I mean, it's not how I would do it, but I mean, it's almost as good as what we're doing. So yeah, just do that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we made a lot of decisions like that did carry a cost, but ultimately the benefit was excellent data.
Okay.
So yeah. I can't remember what the question was. It went off on a bit of a tangent. But
what I'd like to get to there is, okay, so you built this situation where you had this data, which enabled you to define success for the key people in the business, for you to be able to measure how we were tracking against that success.
Yes, that's right.
And set very clear goals, right? But even then, so you go, okay, I need this break because I'm just feeling like I've got other priorities and I'm a bit burnt out. I've created a situation where I can do that. But my other question is, okay, you sort of turned down this offer because you had this business that meant something to you and it was part of you, right? There was that inextricable link between the two.
Yep.
So how do you take a step back and not feel like you're losing a little something? Like
Cool. So we talked about software. The other part of that equation is the why. It's the mission, the purpose, and the values of the business.
Yeah.
And this is where the part of me, or the part of the link between kind of identity and ego and the business is very, very strong, because we've created this culture within First Focus that I think is amazing, and by clearly enunciating that culture and writing it down and then properly embedding it, not just having it on a poster in the wall, which we do, but not just doing that.
You got values behind you.
But by living it, and by, again, coming back to this concept of it's not a strategy unless it's got a cost. What's the cost of that? What are we willing to give up and lose money on in order to be true to those values?
Yeah.
And if you can't demonstrate where you have deliberately lost money in order to do that, then that's not really values, right? So that's the test to me. It's like unless you're willing to wear a cost to do it, then it's not a strategy. It's just common sense. So knowing that the culture within First Focus was very strong, knowing that values, mission, and purpose were very clearly identified, plus having the metrics, it's like I've kind of set this thing up to, we've got the financial forecast, we've got our one-page strategic plan, we've got mission, purpose, values. It's all there.
Right, you're well and truly on the gazelle's framework.
Yeah,
at that
the
point.
Gazelles framework as well is
Okay.
another massive thing for us, right?
Okay.
And also, Ross is very big on Gazelles. Having his previous business was a Gazelles business. It kind of did bits of it, but not all of it. And so again, we kind of said, all right, well, let's do all of it.
Yeah, well, I've worked in a business before that followed the framework, but bits of it. I've never seen it like enacted, lived in the way it is here.
Yeah. And it's expensive to do that.
It also takes a very specific type of leader, I think.
It does.
Very routine, driven,
Yeah.
regimented.
So look, I was pretty lucky in some respects, but they say you should hire people to fill your weaknesses. Don't hire yourself. Right. If you hire yourself, you're going to end up with 5 guys who are all great, or girls that are all great at one thing.
But they're always at the racing track playing poker or golfing.
Well, yeah, exactly, right? And nothing else gets done.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, Ross is the exact opposite of me. He will argue this, or maybe he won't. But I have never met anyone as good operationally as Ross.
No, that's fair. Neither.
Yeah. So super attention to detail. Super. That's a great idea, but how are we going to execute it? What's the detail? Who's going to be in charge of it? What's the implications of this? Like that execution part, he's brilliant at. I get bored of execution too quickly. It's one of my biggest weaknesses. I come up with a lot of ideas, most of which are dumb.
Massive ideas guy.
Yeah. I'll throw hand grenades. Why don't we do this? Let's do that.
Back away. Love it.
And Ross is the execution guy. So I had absolute confidence in Ross's ability to execute a plan.
But I assume that was gained over a period of time. So the question there is, okay, leaving day one, what was your level of certainty or safety or how much trust was there versus 6 months in? You're like, oh my God, this is actually working.
Yeah. So leading up to it, so Ross went from state manager to COO of the business. And
what period of time roughly?
It's a good question. It was probably 9 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quick.
Yeah, pretty quick. And so as a result of that, he flew to Sydney and moved to Sydney. A pretty big commitment on his part to upset the whole family and move to Sydney. So he became COO of the business, and he sat on the exec team with the other execs, and you could tell straight away that he was running significant parts of the business and just absorbing the workload and taking on more and doing the things that were strategically of most importance to the business at the time. So at the time, sales was kind of I was doing that. That's fine.
Yeah.
But the execution side, the implementation of Gazelles, the implementation of ConnectWise, the dashboards, the metrics, doing all that sort of stuff. That was all Ross. I thought, okay, this is great. I've got someone in the business now that I could conceivably take some time off and, the business would be fine. But it got to a point where I was like, actually, you know what? I think Ross could take on so much of this stuff. And the problem that you've got with exceptional performers is if you don't give them a career and a pathway and you can't stretch them and, stretch their abilities, then they're just going to leave, right? Yeah. So I sat down with Ross and I said, so, all right, you and I both know that you're smart enough to run the business. And I think that's what you want to do. Is that something that you'd be interested in? So we had that conversation. I said, all right, so the biggest challenge that I see for you doing that is how you go from being a peer of the other executives to getting that top job, right? Especially
if you come in from a sort of state manager, sort of come in, supersede, I suppose is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. So there's a lot of thinking that went into this, and I can't remember where, but I've read in a couple of different places that most CEO successions fail.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the majority.
Key reasons?
Misaligned culture, wrong person, wrong strategy. Lots of reasons. So I was amazed by that. I think again it was a Harvard Business Review that sort of looked at Fortune 500 businesses and externally hired CEOs that came into a business and
straight into the CEO role.
Straight into the CEO role. Yep. So a hired gun CEO that comes into a business, and the statistic that I saw was that most of them fail, which I found staggering. Like the amount of recruitment money that is spent and the amount of the time and effort that's put into CEO succession processes and to have that result. Incidentally, most M&A deals at that size fail as well. So, yeah.
Like it fail in what respect? In terms of just the expected financial outcomes?
Yeah.
Just that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they most of them don't work as well as they are supposed to. So, whereas internal hires are far more likely to succeed, than external hires. And so, with that background, I was thinking, okay, so if I'm going to look for, redundancy for myself, if I'm going to have a succession plan, who's it going to be? Is it going to be someone internal? Is it going to be a new hire? It's a no-brainer. If you've got someone great in your business who's got runway, who has got the potential to be someone that can operate that business, you can do no greater service to yourself than to elevate that person and give them that runway. I've always been a big believer in making myself redundant. I'm fundamentally very lazy. I don't want to do as little as possible.
Yes, yeah,
and
sure.
so, if
I can the guy that spent 2,000 hours coding his own ticketing system.
But I mean, if I can find something that I'm doing in the business that I don't have to do, that I can give to someone else who will do it just as well as I can.
You'll do the work if you have to, but if there's
it.
an easier way out.
Yeah, definitely. I just found myself in a position where Ross was doing more and more of the operational side of the business that I didn't want to do. We talked about the challenge of having the other execs report to him instead of having him as a peer. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, so I'm not going to say anything to anyone, but let's start this 6-month process whereby I will give you more responsibility in this time frame.
That's the 6 months prior to you taking your 6 months?
Prior to me taking the 6 months off, yeah. And I said, the challenge for you in this 6 months is I would really love to get to the point where if I ask the other execs in 6 months' time how they would feel about working for you, I want all of them to be excited by that.
Demonstrate capability, good guy to work with, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Rather than the other way around, saying, okay, you're the boss, now work on that.
Go prove it.
Yeah. And so it was to me, it was just I guess a process of going through what are the risks, what could go wrong. And the biggest risk to me was by making this change, by me stepping out, the other execs would go, I don't want to work here anymore.
And what, any of that end up happening? I'm assuming no.
No, because we kind of we figured out what the risk was and we kind of got ahead of it. And in hindsight, I don't think it was a massive risk, but I'm really glad that we went through that process, and we took some time to make sure we got that right.
My question, I guess, is, okay, we've talked a lot about numbers and I guess the dynamic with other people involved, but your dynamic with Ross, like how important was it to feel that you were able to have difficult conversations, that you guys had a relationship that gelled, and how did you even stress test that was the case?
I guess I'm fortunate in some respects that I had quite a fractious relationship with my old general manager. He used to beat me up a lot, and he was quite brutal in feedback.
Okay.
And
I can see Ross doing the same.
Yeah, I think that's a very healthy thing, right? I think there's a lot of business owners that have got partners that they can argue with and keep each other honest.
I think as long as it's the radical candor sort of approach, like you want them to win, and the feedback is with that lens.
Yeah. Look, one of our values, one of our core values, has been to call it out.
Yeah.
It's been a value from day one. Brutal honesty. I can think of few things as destructive as office politics. And when I look around the business, I know that everyone's motivation is to do the right thing. There's no malice. There's no hostility. There is just a genuine desire on everyone's behalf to do the right thing. Now, sometimes that comes out as an argument. That's great. That's passion.
Yep.
That's someone with a genuine belief that they are correct about something.
So if no one's arguing, I guess no one cares.
Well, yeah, or they're too afraid to speak up.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So I would hate to be in a business where no one argues. But again, there's a cost attached to that. And the cost attached to that is you must be willing to walk eyes open into a confrontational conversation where someone will say, no, I don't think you're very good at that. And that's a hard thing to do. And we've had people come into the business and just go, oh, this place isn't for us.
Yeah.
And that's cool because there's no way it's ever going to be the best job they've ever had. But we've had other people come into the business and they're like, oh my God, like you guys just had like a argument about something and now it's like we've got a good result. This is awesome. There's no politics. And it takes a while for some people to become acclimatized to that because of that whole radical candor. And it can be confrontational. It can be a little bit brutal at times, but ultimately it serves the purpose of having passionate people have good dialogue about good ideas and choosing the right way forward. Right. And unless people can be free to voice an opinion and go, no, this is dumb, we shouldn't be doing this. Yeah. With no fear that that's going to be persecuted. No fear that someone sitting at the back of the room going, no, this is wrong. We encourage that. We want that. We want those differences of opinion.
So I guess basically, in short, neither of you got feelings when was basically it.
Oh, look, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I get off the phone with Ross and I'm like, man, okay. But I'm sure he does as well.
Sure.
But then, a day later we're on the phone to each other just going, okay, so how are we going to deal with this one? And you need that healthy push and pull. Because that's where ultimately trust comes from.
Yeah.
If Ross just said yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir to everything I said.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in that.
I'd be far more nervous than I am.
Yeah. So I guess then, so I understand why him, the dynamic. You planned 6 months. At what point in that 6 months did you just say, actually, I'm going to completely change the dynamic and not really come back in the role I was previously in?
Yeah, it's a good question. Probably 3 months in.
Okay.
Everything.
Did you communicate it to anyone at that point?
Yeah, I probably communicated to Ross.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just said, yeah, look, this is going really, really well. The dashboards are working, the metrics are working. The reporting process that we've got is great. It just sort of evolved over time. At the time I was doing some other things outside the business that were really interesting. I was just thinking, well, there's no burning need for me to get back involved in the business. There are some things that I'm still absolutely doing. So I was still doing a lot of the financial stuff. I was still, handling banking relationships and looking at M&A. We were starting the M&A process. That was taking a bit of time.
Quite a lot of that happening.
Yeah. So that's really ramped up. So it's not like I ever completely left, and I still haven't completely left. The focus changed. Something else that interesting aside, I was at another exec education thing, and it was a similar Harvard MBA guy that was doing a lecture, and he said, what's the difference between a top CEO and an average CEO? Culture, purpose, sales ability, charisma, everyone's tossing around these ideas. He goes, yeah, all that stuff is really great. But we did a study at Harvard. We got a whole bunch of Harvard grads in a room. We did this 6-month research project. We looked at Fortune 500 companies over the last 50 years by share price, what separated the top 10% performing businesses from everyone else. And they looked at a whole bunch of different things, and they boiled it down to this. Top performing CEOs made 2 good decisions a year. And that was the difference between a top 10% CEO and an average CEO, was just 2 good decisions a year. Everything else was kind of secondary to that.
Right.
I was like, wow, that's actually an amazing statistic. How many businesses have CEOs that spend 99% of their time thinking about the immediate and very little time thinking deeply about big strategic questions?
It's funny, even yesterday, I was just to, I guess give related kudos to Ross in the space yesterday in our ELT huddle. He's like, guys, this is something very operational. Like, we need to remember this is a strategic platform.
Yes.
Like, so yeah, that focus is definitely still there.
So my focus is now almost exclusively strategic.
Yeah.
So if I can make or influence a handful of strategic decisions a year, then I see that as a pretty important thing.
You're sounding very Jeff Bezos kind of vibe. I remember an interview with him. He said, my job is to make a very small number of very important decisions.
Exactly right. Right. Yeah, and it's true. If there's another well-known metric that a healthy business is one where the higher up you go, the less busy each person is. If you've got a business where, the CEO is running around like a madman with his hair on fire and all of the staff are sitting around, throwing bits of paper at each other, that's not a healthy business.
Disconnect right? There, yeah.
But if it's the other way around, where, all of the first line people are busy and active and productive and doing, heavily engaged in the processes of the business, and then the higher up that business you go, the more time is available for strategic thinking and creative problem solving, then obviously that sounds like a healthier business.
It does.
But how many businesses actually fit that?
Few, I would suggest, yeah.
So why? Because that's, that's
is
fundamentally...
some of it about scale? Like, is some of it about... There almost needs to be a sufficient capacity at a senior level for the CEO to be able to focus on the things that matter. Like, there is... You talked earlier in our last conversation about those tipping points, those plateaus you kind of get past. I assume that's one of them?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's got anything to do with scale. I think it's got everything to do with the maturity of the management.
Okay.
And when I say maturity not in the sense of immaturity in the sense of experience and learning. If you've got a very small business, 5 staff, a lot of the owners of a small business will think, right, if I don't do everything, it's not going to get done. But there is absolutely nothing stopping the owner of that business from taking the mentality of standing at the back of the room and letting the staff figure it out, and watching failure and accepting the cost, the strategic cost of failure, in order to gain the strategic value of time and space to make strategic decisions. Okay, so now a small business might not be able to incur that cost because you're struggling for revenue, you're struggling for profitability, et cetera, et cetera. That makes it hard. But I would argue that if you made it a strategic imperative of that business to structure yourself in that way, where your first line workers are working entirely on productive things, and the manager is divesting themselves of every possible thing, take every opportunity that you can to get someone else in the business to do something, right? And do that constantly and apply that pressure constantly, make that the culture of the business to do that.
Yeah.
That is a very different business to a lot of small businesses.
That's true. I think coming out from the sales perspective, the only thing that I think makes it hard from a CEO perspective to focus on those high level things is the fact that we talked about in our last conversation is you are the best salesperson in that business, and it can be very hard to detangle yourself from that because who's next? I think that seems like the single hardest part. I can imagine you finding it quite hard to replace you as the best salesperson.
Yeah. Look, definitely. There are some roles where you're going to have succession gaps, right? So, if the owner of the business is from a technical background, if we're talking about MSPs, and let's say it's an MSP that's started by an awesome sysadmin who leaves a big business and sets up their own MSP, and they become a security expert and they become an expert in networking, and they hire a sales guy or a sales girl, then it's going to be very hard for that person to extract themselves from that sort of senior networking consulting piece. Yeah. But they can absolutely divest the sales to whoever it is that they hire, and vice versa, right? So for me, my background was not in infrastructure, it was in software. And so it was actually very easy for me to extract myself from the networking side and the sysadmin side and put myself in sales. So yeah, 100%. It depends on where your gaps are in that succession pathway.
Yeah.
But the overriding, the underlying culture within the management team of making yourself redundant is like this tidal force. Whereas if you use that as a linchpin, every day you come into the office, what am I doing today? Which of these tasks can I get someone else to do?
Yeah.
Right. Which of these tasks can I empower? And it's not about delegating things and just going, oh, you do this, you get my cup of coffee in the morning. It's about, okay, out of all of the people who are, available in this organization, who can I empower to step up into a bigger role than they've got right now? Mm-hmm. How can I lift up more and more people? And if that then becomes the culture of the organization, that strategically, that engenders internal promotions, it engenders better documentation and better processes, because now you have to kind of impart that knowledge. It carries a cost. Sometimes you've got to hire people who are overqualified to do a basic role. So in order to bring up more and more of the functions from the manager that sits above them. But I think ultimately it was that strategic approach at First Focus. It kind of drew a lot of growth.
Nice. So I guess I'm keen to sort of tie a bow on this conversation with a nice solid takeaway, which is drawing from your experience. If you're a business owner or a CEO who's looking to empower the team below them in a 50 to 200 seat organization, it sounds like, and this is where you can correct me if I'm off base, but one is understanding your why, having the foresight to understand what you want, and that's going to help you determine and have the foresight to start, as you say, empowering the people beneath you, but also seeing the data that's going to give you the information to build the forecast. So you're going to be able to, any point in your exit journey, you're going to be able to understand when you need to course correct as well. What am I missing there? What are the other components that you think are just key to for people to understand off the back of this chat?
So I think, so ultimately succession planning is not something that happens overnight. And like most things, it starts with a foundation. And the foundation is mission, purpose, values. So all of those nice core things about why a business is what it is. Having the data and metrics to back up mission, purpose, values. Those two things together mean that the business has got a roadmap that can be followed, which means ultimately someone in charge of the business can hand that roadmap to someone and they can very clearly understand where we're going and why we're going there.
Nice. And then find the right person who you have the right dynamic with to I guess take it from there. And
that's an important point. Do the foundation before you find the person.
Okay.
Because in defining your mission, purpose, values, and in defining your numbers and your metrics and your strategy, that will inform who it is that is going to be capable to execute that. And the who is going to be different depending on what that roadmap looks like.
Nice. All right, well, I'm going to go and talk to Ross's part 2 of this conversation and get his version of the same scenario. And it's going to be really interesting to sort of compare and contrast and see, as the person stepping up versus the person stepping out, what the dynamic and what the understanding and what the roadmap look like, that difference. But thank you very much for giving us the insight, part 2 of, I guess, our chat with Pete, the founder. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And now I think I'm going to hand you over to Danny to do a whole bunch more video work that'll be there. But I guess to sign this out from an episode perspective, we are going to talk to Ross Sardi, our CEO, as the second part of our succession planning and execution series. It's 2 parts of a podcast, a series, not sure, but that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned.